All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining me today on the topic of gut absorption and how we can really increase our ability to absorb nutrients that we're really working on nourishing our body with in terms of our nutrition choices that can also help our gut function, the cells of our gut lining, but also fuel our body and our system and prevent disease. So when we think of the digestive system, right, it is the area of connection to all health. What we eat, what we think, what we're exposed to, all comes in contact and has an effect on the digestive system, which starts at the mouth and ends at the opposite end. And so every day we can make choices that can either support our digestive health and enable better function, or we can choose things that may also start to create problems that can arise. And, it's not in our head, it's also in our environment. What we put on our body and what we put into our body are things that we have full control of. So the digestive system, when we think of digestive system, we're thinking about the abdominal area. But as I said just earlier, our digestive system actually starts from where we put things in our mouth all the way to the opposite end. And when we're thinking about food, a lot of you will notice, you smell something really good. The food is cooking in the oven. All of those scenarios, right, are going to start to secrete some enzymes. We're going to start to salivate. So digestion actually starts even before we put that first spoonful or forkful of food into our mouth. And so most symptoms will arise in the abdominal area, but we can have things coming up into the mouth and into the throat, and then also affecting us otherwise. So what we need to think about when we think about absorption, our body is working to take this bigger item, like a steak or an apple or an egg or fruit, and break it down into smaller components so we can easily absorb it. So we're not really absorbing a steak, we're absorbing its broken down components. And what plays a role there are those nutrients, right? The nutrients that are broken down into smaller molecules. We go back to high school, which many of us may not want to go back to, or even undergrad chemistry, or chemical bonds that form together form different products. But we have enzymes that come in and break those bonds and change the size of the molecule and also possibly the action of the molecule to a certain extent. So we're doing a lot of catabolism breakdown as we chew our food and as the enzymes come in. This enables better absorption right at the gut lining where we absorb in the small intestine. So we do have that component, but then we have anabolic actions where we take those smaller pieces, like you take a castle of Lego, you break it down into smaller Lego pieces and you put back the castle of Lego in the system. So there's a lot of energy involved there, energy transformation. So when we think of digestion and absorption, we have to think of not only the things we're putting in, but then we have to think how are we fueling that boundary between the external world and the internal system to protect it, because that's kind of like our skin barrier, right? Our skin protects us from temperature differences, from precipitation, for anything else that it's capable of. The gut lining that lines the small intestine, that lines the esophagus, that lines the stomach, is literally, for most part, at least in the small intestine where most absorption happens, is one single layer. It's a very specialized layer, but it is one single layer. So our healthy gut is what's crucial for our overall health. This is why when I think about healthcare and how I help my patients is I always address the gut. Even if you're not having digestive system issues, if you're not having any discomfort following meals or any type of burping or gassiness or bloating or indigestion, any symptoms like that, you may say, okay, well, my gut is healthy. But when you're having brain fog, when you're having low energy, when you're having skin irritations, those can also point to issues in the gut. And this is why when I address health from a beginning stage with my patients, I start at the gut level. If everything is working great, amazing. We're going to jump up a couple steps and then continue to work in the area of your chief concern. So as we know, unfortunately, as we've, created better things in this world and extended our abilities, we've also created more toxic environment. And so we really need to think about not only our digestive system in terms of the gut lining, but the accessory digestive organs like the liver and gallbladder and pancreas that are going to help support. And we know that the liver is constantly bombarded by toxins. And we want to make sure metabolically its detox process is involved. So that also comes into play when we think of absorption issues. That could be a big player because everything we eat and drink will be filtered by the liver first for a protective measure. And so when we think digestion and just digestive system, it includes all of those accessory components as well. So what does our digestive system do, right? We said it breaks down things from bigger to smaller, and that smaller component is what allows it to penetrate, pardon me, into the internal system through the gut lining. And our gut lining is specialized. It does have some mucus that's going to protect it. It's going to have specialized cells that are going to recognize. And it has what we call almost like bodyguards that protect that entrance area to make sure that the molecules of a certain size. There's no markers on them that indicate possible foreign material that could be intrusive and damaging to the system. And so it's a very intricate system. It's very fascinating because when we think of the size of the gut, and we're only talking below the gut right now in terms of absorption, we're relying more on the small intestine. This is where most of our absorption happens, probably 95% of it. There are what we call like finger-like projections. They kind of stick out. So our surface area for absorption surface area is increased because of these finger-like projections. And so if we were really just open it up completely, it would be almost as long as a football field in terms of its size. And so this is just really fascinating to see the complexity of this small intestine for absorption. But at the same time, it's so simple in that it's one single layer because we also don't want to make it super difficult to get our nutrients. We want the nutrients. We don't want to have to expend way too much energy. And so we want to simplify its absorption capabilities, but then at the same time protect. So the body is very good at being able to do this. So part of our gut and part of our entire system is we're full of a lot of germ cells, as we'll say, microbiome. We have a microbiome on our skin. We have a microbiome within our digestive system. And depending where we are, there's going to be a different makeup of this microbiome, but we're looking at 100,000 billion cells within the intestine. And within those different cells, there are different species and different strains. So if you've ever picked up a probiotic bottle, you'll see these lines of species and strains and the number. And so probiotics, we're going to talk a little bit about towards the end, but when we think of this microbiome, think of it again, part of our protective function. It's going to support the gut. It's going to protect the gut. But some strains like Candida are found in the digestive lining, and they can take refuge and grow bigger if they're given a chance. So there's different ways where we can have dysbiosis or overgrowth, even from things that are already found in our gut. But they work together to protect. They work together to enable digestive function. And they also help with just the overall function of absorption as well. But we do want to feed them. And usually when we eat things like fiber-rich foods, they're going to feed the gut. They're seen as prebiotics. We also have some probiotics, things like in your yogurt, that are going to help rebuild and bring in because cells die off. And so do the microbiome components. They could die off. And then if we're exposed to toxins, they're going to put up a fight. They're part of our immune system. Or if we have to take something like an antibiotic, we're going to wipe them out, but we can bring them back in. We've got a lot of ways to get more population back in and help heal. It's all about that balance. We want to make sure we don't have things overgrowing, and we also want to make sure we have a good range or a good strain and species number of our population. So again, what does our microbiome do? As we said, it does have an effect within the nervous system. We'll see that we do see that gut-brain connection, and part of that is symptomatically, but we do see that the vagus nerve, actually part of our nervous system, does connect to our gut. There's almost a component there that it makes it all the way to the intestine. The other area too is the digestive system, specifically in the large intestine, does enable absorption of, the production of certain neurotransmitters like serotonin, as well as the creation of certain vitamins like vitamin K. So there are additional functions within the digestive system other than just protection and absorption. They do help the synthesis of certain vitamins. We also, this is where we kind of store things. We also make sure we're producing some energy because that is our fuel source. That's our currency for the body is energy or glucose or what we call ATP. So the microbiome is an integral role and everyone's microbiome is different. For the most part, we have a consistency, but your exposure, your mom's health, your maternal health, the feeding, our feeding of our body, how we're nourishing our body postpartum, all of those scenarios can really change the microbiome makeup. So with gut imbalance, when we think things are going wrong, right, that means that there's something affecting our ability to digest. So what that means is absorption can also be affected. So if you're having some changes in bowel, we should have daily bowel movements every day, easy to pass. If you have 2 or 3 a day, amazing. But we don't want it to be painful. We don't want it to be at the extremes of very hard to pass or very easy to pass and very much creating some sort of urgency. So when the stomach feels off or just the whole digestive system aspect of its functions feels off, it could be a sign that absorption could be impacted. When we crave certain things like sweets or salt, what that could indicate, one, is nourishment-wise, we're not getting the right nutrients. We're not getting enough of our proteins or our fats, or we're not eating enough, period, like skipping meals. But also cravings could indicate, in a sense, when you're craving something sweet or you have a craving, that means there's an imbalance of nutrient intake. And so from an absorption perspective, that could mean that you may have been eating really well, but then you're not getting the nutrients in. And so your body is now craving sugars or sweets. It's craving energy is what it's really craving in the end. And so this can create havoc. When we have a microbiome imbalance, those can also start to consume some of our energy resources and utilize those energy resources, which could also mimic similarity to thinking that there's an absorption issue or could indirectly impact absorption. Weight loss, weight gain, those are always scenarios that we do have some dysfunction happening in the gut. And when the weight component comes in, we start to think about those accessory organs. Part of that is going to be things like insulin. Insulin is secreted when we consume a meal, food or drink, and it's going to be secreted from the pancreas. And insulin's job is to come in and push the sugars that are formed from the breakdown into the cells. We like to keep things within a range. So your glucose in the blood was within a range. Your sodium, potassium within the blood is a certain range. Your iron, all of those levels are really kept in a small range by the body. Physiologically, there are ways to check for that. And it's just really intriguing how the body can always keep track from different sensors throughout the system. But our insulin with regards to diet and absorption comes in. And when we think of the scale going up or down, and usually it's going up for most individuals, what we think about is now all of a sudden we could have more inflammation. There's some possible damage to the gut lining from stress, from toxins, from foods that are actually, have an actual microbial infection like Salmonella, Shigella, or even a yeast overgrowth that has created in the digestive system because of SIBO, not because of SIBO, because of dysbiosis. Either way, when insulin is trying to do its work, something is impacting it. And so we can start to see hormonal dysfunctions following absorption issues. An absorption issue will usually have some level of inflammation. So when we are not absorbing nutrients or we're overeating certain food groups like foods high in sugars, we're gonna end up pushing that system much more and put into a overstress system. If you're stressing a lot, and again, I think stress is a word that's overused these days, but when we think of the pressure and overwhelm we have in day-to-day life, that stress, that stressor, that sensation can impact the gut. In Chinese medicine, we have similar organ systems, but the way they interact is a little bit different. And so the liver organ is the one that controls the free flow of qi. And so when our stress response is high or emotions are high, what happens is the liver goes into overdrive. We call it liver yang or liver qi stagnation first. That becomes liver yang rising. That can become liver fire. That doesn't mean there's anything physiologically wrong with the liver, but from an interrelationship perspective, as I approach it naturopathically as well, is that the liver then can start to attack the spleen and stomach, in the sense that spleen and stomach is all about digestion. And so when we impact their function, our ability to absorb nutrients is affected. All of a sudden we feel heavy, we have bloating, maybe we have acid reflux and some burping. Those are some symptoms there. So again, the impact of our emotional state has a big impact on our absorption state of the body, and especially of the gut lining. And so those can start to really affect the ability to absorb the right nutrients and then to keep weight balanced. One area that a lot of us will think about and can be hard to treat is sleep. So where we reboot and regenerate our system. This is where we allow healing. The gut lining, as said, was one single layer. It's a very specialized, complex layer, but what is interesting is that it has a high turnover rate, which makes sense, right? It's going to be impacted a lot by everything that we eat and drink and our exposures. It does have a high turnover rate, which is great because that means we're always constantly having an influx of new cells fixing that lining. But that can also mean that if we're not having time to reboot and regenerate, if we're not getting the right nutrients, that rebooting of the gut lining could be slower, could be less effective. And we start to get, and a lot of you have heard this term, leaky gut, where the gut lining, the holding of that wall between outside and inside starts to break down. And so our protective measures get affected. And so microbes that usually don't get in can get in and cause more inflammation. The larger food particles that shouldn't be absorbed start to create reactivity. And so we start to get this domino effect of issues. And then what I find a lot of times is the gut with your autoimmunity. So again, with the hormonal aspect, we can start to see its impact on the thyroid, which is all about metabolism and keeping our body temperature regulated and just the overall function. We can see issues into the cortisol picture, causing maybe more cortisol secretion because of the inflamed and stressed state, can lead to adrenal dysfunctions down the road. And we can see blood pressure changes also arising. On top of it, with that leaky gut area, is we can start to see it start to affect joints. We start to see more inflamed joints, like in arthritises. We can see painful joints, swollen joints. So all of these responses at the gut lining are starting to affect other regions. So stress, toxins, the foods we eat and what are made up of those foods, and how our emotions can all affect the digestive system. So with stress, as we talked about, the other part we want to think about is our nervous system. And so our nervous system, we kind of go into two states, right? We have our central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord. And then we have our peripheral nervous system, which is everything else. And so there's constant communication between these systems. And then as we break down that peripheral nervous system, we get into the autonomic system. We have our sympathetic fight or flight response and our parasympathetic rest and digest. So when we eat or when we're eating to increase absorptive capabilities, we want to be in that rest or digest scenario. And a lot of times, many people are eating on the go. People are eating during meetings. People are just grazing all day, we don't really have that set rest and digest moment. And this is why it's really good. Take yourself up for dinner. Set yourself up at the dinner table. Have less distractions. Enjoy chewing, enjoying your meals. You get yourself into that parasympathetic state, which allows you to digest better because you're going to be secreting the right enzymes and you're going to be helping absorption component much better. This will create less inflammatory response in the body and less symptomatic response because of it. So stress itself, right? It is something that is uncontrollable, but through breath work and through just, working through things, whatever works for you is a way to get you back into a calm state. Block off your lunch break. Make sure you set up your dinner break. Make sure you set yourself up so you can have your breakfast. Have time to enjoy those meals, enjoy the fact that you're nurturing your body to allow your body to also be able to absorb all the good stuff you're getting from the food. Dietary aspects as well as food. The food we eat is really important and it's easier said than done. But what we want to look at is whole foods. When we don't eat whole foods and we eat a lot of processed foods, there's a lot of chemicals. There's a lot of components in the food to keep it from going bad and spoiling and to prevent it from having a certain taste, make it taste better because it's not really real food. And so anything that's boxed or bagged in a sense that comes from a truck, unfortunately most food comes from a truck because we're importing and exporting food, but anything that's not in the whole foods, it's not a real piece of food, we do risk some reactivity. And it's not to say there's anything wrong with those, but a lot of those foods are more laden with chemicals in ways to keep it from going bad. So we really want to look at the whole foods and it's about that moderation, it's about that balance, and it's about that consistency. When we think about food, and I'll get into the main food groups that we want to think about and what they do, is just making sure that it's anti-inflammatory, it's not laced. If the ingredients have a long list, that's a long list on the body's effect. We just want to do our best there. And where you can choose organic versus inorganic, there is the EWG's yearly list. You can always choose according to that because it can be hard otherwise. But food itself should be whole food. It should be real food. It shouldn't come boxed and it shouldn't have a list of ingredients and it shouldn't be flavored. That would reduce our kind of attack on the gut lining and enable better digestion and enable better absorption as well. And so a lot of times when the food is filled with chemicals or filled from processing and has all these emulsifiers, things like carrageenan that's found in some ice creams and some yogurts. And again, yogurt is a pretty healthy food group for the most part. But carrageenan does wreak havoc on the gut lining. It does act and affect the lining of the gut from dysfunction causing inflammation and other problems. So leaky gut is a term that we've used. A lot of people have used it. It's just telling you the gut is leaky. So instead of that protective function, it's not protective anymore. And so we'll have a lot of inflammation that can affect the joints. We can have a lot of antigen, antibody because our body's trying to protect ourselves from this foreign molecule and start to create things like Hashimoto's or hypothyroidism. The skin is kind of a communication way of the gut. So more inflammation, we see things like psoriasis or eczema. We see changes in mood and we see changes in bowels. So how can we really kind of look at digestive function? And I actually kind of wanted to create a little bit easier to read slide here. First things first, what I love doing with most of my patients is a simple thing called a diet diary. Now, when we have the two terms, we have a allergy to foods and we have an intolerance or sensitivity to foods. An allergy would recreate an immediate reaction. So we have this allergic reaction. It's IgE based. And so what that means is I eat something like a peanut or shellfish. and my body reacts right away because it has these antigens set up, and we create like, swelling in the throat, we can get welts on the body, we can get itchiness, we can have trouble breathing. This can be life-threatening. And this is the case where we say, you just don't eat that food. So if you have a peanut allergy, you don't eat peanuts unless you want to have an EpiPen stabbed into your leg and you have to go to the hospital. When we think of sensitivities or intolerances is another word, we are sensitive or intolerant to a food, but it's because of how much we're having of it. If you think of, the American meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, most time we'll think breakfast, okay, has eggs, but toast. Dinner has, lunch has toast as well. And then, or breads or sandwiches. And then dinner also will have breads and more carbs. So all of these create this overflow of the cup. And so what happens there is now all of a sudden we're intolerant or sensitive because we just keep filling the cup too much with that same food group. So we can look at basic blood work to see if there's any infections. We can look at the state of your health with iron and B12 and other markers to make sure that you're absorbing nutrients and how you're doing overall. We can look at your stool if there's any type of overgrowth or type of bacteria that we have, maybe from an infection as well. Food sensitivity looks at how sensitive you are to certain food groups. And I don't look at that as you have to restrict those forever. I look at it as it tells me how inflamed your gut is. Zonulin test shows me how bad your leaky gut is, and that's something you can test through stool or blood. Microbial analysis kind of follows the stool testing, so that's something we can see if there's an overgrowth. And then I always like to look at hormones because the gut and hormone connection tells me if there's a lot of hormonal dysregulation, there's something still stemming in the gut lining that I need to think about. So from a perspective of testing and more investigative, as needed, these are done. I would not do everything. I would look at ones that really pinpoint the health concerns we may be having. So the main thing I want to just touch on food groups, I'm going to end here, is that our 4 basic food groups, when we think of whole foods, we need to hydrate ourselves because we are primarily 60 to 70% water. We want to make sure our food has protein. We want to have protein is the building block. It's broken down into the body to amino acids. That's what we absorb is amino acids. And these amino acids can help heal the gut lining, help feed the gut lining, and help make sure that we keep our absorption numbers up. Carbohydrates are plentiful. They are our breads, but they are also our fruits and veggies. They are a fuel source, and we like them, but we like them in moderation. And we also want to look at them from a perspective, which ones are higher in sugar and which ones are lower in sugar. And then our carbohydrates, especially our starchy carbs, do have the soluble and insoluble fibers. So that can help us bulk up stool, can help protect the gut lining, and help us also eliminate toxins. Fats like proteins are all about satiating ourselves, and they help us fuel our body. We do like fats. They lubricate our body. They support our brain. Our brain's pretty much big fat tissue. So when we think of whole foods, we want to think of these 4 groups. Water is still included there, and coffee, unfortunately, does not count as water, even though it uses water to be made. We want to look at hydration, and we want to look at the big food groups, your proteins and fats, and then your carbs should fill up the rest of the plate. So those are going to be ways to fuel and heal your gut lining as well as fuel your body through absorption. So what can we do to heal our gut? We want to look at food. How do we eat? When we eat? How often we eat? Spacing your meals, having 3 meals a day, not skipping and getting enough of the nutrients right for your body, right? Protein intake is very important for muscle. It's very important for overall health. You want to look at your energy. Your mental health, your emotions. How are you thinking about your health? Are you taking care of yourself? Are you thinking positively? Are you doing things that are taking you to a place that you want to be doing? What are your lifestyle habits? What's your movement? What's your sleep like? We need to work on that. And it's not about perfection. It's about balance and consistency. So eating your 3 meals, sure, you'll have a piece of cake at the party. It's your birthday, go enjoy. Or you just really wanted that piece of cake because it was there and they had it on sale. Enjoy it, right? You don't want to have negativity towards our food choices either. But we also want to understand it's moderation. We can't have a cake every day. We want to make sure that we are minimizing our exposure to toxins. So those are things that are in our food that are using to make our food, that could be growing our food or could be laced in our food. So if we can do our best to avoid as much as possible, that will minimize our absorption damage to our gut lining. All about balance, and it's all about consistency, as I said. Things we can think about. One of the major amino acids, L-glutamine, is great because it helps the gut lining heal, the lining of the gut, and so can really help in leaky gut and absorption issues. Aloe vera has its place as well. It's very reducing to the inflammatory component and can be seen as anti-inflammatory. You want to be cautious. Some aloe veras do contain a latex, which are more laxative. We also think of your cat's claw and your althea and your marshmallow. All of these are anti-inflammatory mucus producing, so very soothing to the gut lining. We also want to make sure our digestive enzymes are working. We have proper enzymatic action, so sometimes those could be helpful. Again, this is very specific to your condition. I would always work with a naturopathic doctor or nutritionist to make sure it's ideal for what you need, especially if you're on any other medications or you're taking anything else as well, orally or internally. So you want to look at diet, you want to look at our lifestyle, we want to look at our emotions, journaling, getting out, less blue light, more real light and sunlight, making sure our morning and nighttime routines are serving our goals, right? And helping us sleep better and more restorative sleep, helping us get our body moving daily. And then you can use other adjunctive therapies like acupuncture and other therapies that can be very helpful just for the body as a whole. So those are ways that we can help ourselves. So thank you. I think, working on digestive function is going to really enable looking at how you absorb your nutrients and how well your gut is functioning for the long term in terms of preventing disease, keeping weight off, keeping the energy up, and letting you function your best every day.